The snow fell mercilessly as I climbed the stairs of the elegant building in Beacon Hill, my feet aching after 36 hours on call. 6 months of pregnancy weighed on my exhausted body, but I smiled imagining James's face when I told him about the latest ultrasound. Our twins were developing perfectly. I inserted my key into the lock, surprised to find the door already open. Strange. James was meticulous about security. "James," I called, dropping my heavy bag on the console table in the entryway. The apartment was eerily quiet. I followed the silence to our bedroom, where I found him closing a suitcase. Not his, mine. "What's happening?" I asked, my heart suddenly racing. He didn't even look up. "It's over, Charlotte. You need to leave." I thought it was a cruel joke. We had just chosen names for the babies last weekend. We had plans. "What are you talking about? I'm 6 months pregnant, James, with twins, your children." That's when he finally looked at me, and I didn't recognize the man before me. His eyes, normally warm when they gazed at me, were cold as the ice forming on the windows. "A resident like you will never be enough for me, Charlotte. Look at yourself, always exhausted, no connections, no influential family. You're just a burden to my career." The words hit me like a terminal diagnosis, sudden, brutal, irrevocable. Veronica and I have been together for months. She understands what I need, the connections I need to make. The hospital is considering me for department head, and I need someone who can properly represent me. Veronica, his executive secretary, daughter of one of the hospital's biggest donors. While I was working double shifts, he was building an alternative life. "And our babies?" I managed to whisper, my hands instinctively protecting my belly. "Be realistic, Charlotte. You can barely support yourself. How will you raise 2 children? Do whatever you want, but don't involve me." He dragged my suitcase into the hallway and dropped it at my feet, a gesture as final as the words that followed. "I don't have time for drama. I have an important presentation tomorrow. Leave your keys at the front desk." The door closed in my face. I stood there for a full minute, unable to process what had happened. I felt the babies moving, as if protesting against the sudden increase in my heart rate. That night, I drove to Dorchester, to a tiny apartment I could barely afford on my residence salary. A co-worker had offered me the place temporarily. Sitting on a borrowed mattress, wrapped in a thin blanket, I let the tears flow freely as the snow turned Boston into a white desert. The following months were a lesson in humiliation and survival. I continued my residency, hiding morning sickness during procedures, pretending not to hear the whispers when James appeared hand in hand with Veronica. I worked extra shifts at a community clinic on weekends to save every possible penny. When Ethan and Emily were born on an April dawn, there was no one holding my hand except the nurse on duty. But looking at those perfect faces, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. James Walker was wrong about everything, about me, about our children, about what I was capable of. I returned to residency just 4 weeks after giving birth, leaving the twins with an elderly lady from my building who charged less than formal daycares. Between surgeries, I pumped milk in the locker room. In the middle of the night, I studied new procedures while breastfeeding. I began developing my own surgical technique for repairing congenital heart defects in infants, working during my spare hours. When the twins turned 1, my paper on the technique was accepted by the Journal of Pediatric Surgery. By their 2nd birthday, I received an invitation to present it at an international conference. By their 3rd, I was invited to lead an experimental pediatric surgery pilot program at a university hospital. One night, as the twins slept in our small living room turned bedroom, I made a silent promise. We wouldn't just survive, we would thrive. And one day, I would show James Walker the empire I built from the ashes he left behind. That night, as a new mother, exhausted but determined, I couldn't have predicted that in 10 years I would be on a stage receiving an international award for a surgical technique that would save thousands of children, while James Walker watched from the shadows, finally realizing what he had lost. In the months that followed that fateful night, I navigated the hospital corridors with my head held high, though inside I was crumbling. Every corner seemed to hold a memory, every surgical suite a reminder of James and what could have been. The whispers followed me like persistent shadows. That's her, the one Dr. Walker dumped. I pretended not to hear them as I reviewed patient charts, my pregnant body growing heavier each day. My once pristine white coat strained against my belly, a visible reminder of what James had discarded. The community clinic in Roxbury became my weekend sanctuary. Unlike the prestigious halls of Mass General, nobody there knew my story. To them, I was just another dedicated doctor helping the underserved, not the abandoned pregnant resident whose boyfriend traded up for someone with better connections. "You're a godsend, Dr. Morgan," Mrs. Ramirez told me after I treated her grandson's asthma attack. "Working weekends in your condition?" I smiled, not telling her I needed every extra dollar those shifts provided. My tiny apartment in Dorchester felt more like a closet than a home, but I was transforming it, one second-hand purchase at a time. The crib I found at a church donation center, the changing table from a yard sale. Piece by piece, I created a nest for the lives growing inside me. Nights were the hardest. I'd sit on my windowsill, watching the lights of Boston flicker, wondering how James could sleep peacefully after what he'd done. I'd place my hands on my belly, feeling the twins move. "We'll be okay," I whispered to them. "I promise." The first contraction hit at 3 in the morning on a rainy April day. I had just finished studying a new cardiac procedure, my eyes burning from exhaustion. The pain radiated through my lower back, stealing my breath. No one to call. No one to drive me. I grabbed my hastily packed hospital bag and stumbled down to the street, rain soaking through my coat. "Lady, you okay?" The taxi driver eyed me suspiciously as I doubled over beside his car. "Boston Medical. I'm in labor," I managed between breaths. "First baby?" he asked, pulling into traffic. "Twins," I replied, gritting my teeth. His eyes widened in the rearview mirror. "Your husband meeting you there?" I turned away, watching raindrops race down the window. "There's no husband." The labor room felt vast and empty. A kind nurse named Esther held my hand through the worst contractions, whispering encouragement when I thought I couldn't push anymore. "You're doing great, honey. Almost there." Ethan arrived first, his angry cry filling the room. Emily followed 7 minutes later, smaller but equally fierce. When they placed my son and daughter on my chest, something shifted inside me. Looking into their perfect faces, James's nose, my eyes, I felt a surge of determination, unlike anything I'd ever known. "I'm your mom," I whispered, "and I will never, ever let you down." 4 weeks later, I returned to my residency, leaving the twins with Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly widow from the first floor of my building. "They are beautiful babies," she cooed, settling them into the second-hand bassinet in her apartment that smelled of Cuban coffee and cinnamon. "You work hard, doctora. I keep them safe." Between surgeries, I hid in supply closets to pump milk, storing it carefully in the staff refrigerator. Senior residents rolled their eyes at the labeled bottles. One day, I overheard Dr. Simmons complaining to the charge nurse. "Morgan's milk takes up half the fridge. Can't she do that at home like normal mothers?" I bit my tongue and kept pumping. At night, I balanced textbooks on my knees while nursing, highlighting passages about innovative cardiac procedures while Ethan and Emily suckled. My mind began connecting dots that others missed. a new approach to repairing ventricular septal defects in infants that could reduce recovery time and improve outcomes. When the twins turned 1, celebrated with a small cupcake in our apartment, now filled with developmental toys from thrift stores, I submitted my paper to the Journal of Pediatric Surgery. 3 months later, the acceptance email arrived. By their second birthday, I was presenting my technique at a conference in Chicago, having scraped together enough for a hotel room where the 3 of us shared one bed. At 3, the twins started preschool, while I began leading a pilot program implementing my surgical innovation. One night, watching them sleep on the pull-out couch in our living room, still too poor for a proper apartment with separate bedrooms, I made my silent vow. We would rise from these ashes. The woman James Walker had deemed insufficient would become extraordinary. That night, as I charted our future, exhausted but resolute, I couldn't have imagined that in 7 years I would be accepting an international award for my surgical technique, while James Walker would observe from the shadows, finally recognizing the magnitude of what he had thrown away. I returned to the surgical residency program exactly 28 days after giving birth. My body still ached, my breasts leaked milk at inopportune moments, and fatigue clouded my vision like a persistent fog. But I had no choice. The twins needed food, shelter, and a mother who could provide for their future. "Are you sure you're ready, Dr. Morgan?" Dr. Lewis asked when I appeared for morning rounds, my white coat buttoned tightly over my still swollen abdomen. "Absolutely," I lied, ignoring the sympathetic glances from nurses who knew better. Mrs. Martinez, the elderly widow from my building, had become my salvation. Her arthritic hands were still gentle enough to cradle my babies, and her rate was half what the nearest daycare charged. "They are beautiful like their mama," she'd say each morning as I reluctantly handed them over, my heart tearing a little more with each goodbye. Between surgeries, I'd rush to the women's locker room, locking myself in a bathroom stall to pump breast milk. One afternoon, I knocked over the containers while rushing back to the OR, watching in horror as hours of precious milk spread across the tile floor. Chief Surgeon Dr. Woodward stepped over the puddle without comment, his eyes never meeting mine as I knelt to clean up, tears mixing with the spilled milk. The nights became a blur of feedings, studying, and stolen moments of sleep. I'd nursed the twins while highlighting surgical journals, their tiny bodies warm against mine as I memorized new techniques for atrial septal repairs. Often, I'd catch myself nodding off, only to jolt awake in panic, checking that I hadn't dropped one of my precious babies. 3 months into this impossible balancing act, both twins developed high fevers within hours of each other. "Dr. Lewis, I can't assist today," I said into the phone, Ethan wailing in my arms while Emily coughed in the makeshift crib beside me. "My children are sick." His sigh carried through the line. "This is the second time this month, Morgan. The Hendricks valve replacement is crucial for your training. I understand, but you need to figure this out. Either you're committed to this program or you're not." The meeting in his office the following week was brief and devastating. "Morgan, you have tremendous potential," Dr. Lewis said, folding his hands on his desk. "But this program demands 100% commitment. Your personal situation is complicated." "With all respect, doctor," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt, "I will give 200%, 100 for my children and 100 for my career." His raised eyebrows told me he didn't believe it possible. I began working nights in the hospital lab, testing my theories on pediatric cardiac repairs, while the twins slept in their double stroller beside me. Security guards turned a blind eye, some even bringing me coffee during their rounds. 3 weeks later, I was rushing samples to the pathology department when the elevator doors opened to reveal James and Veronica. Her left hand rested prominently on his arm, a massive diamond catching the fluorescent light. "Charlotte!" James nodded stiffly, his eyes barely meeting mine. "I've been appointed associate director of the department," he announced, his tone suggesting I should congratulate him. Veronica's smile was glacial. "And we're getting married at the plaza in June. It'll be the hospital event of the year." I mumbled something appropriate and stared at the elevator buttons until they exited on the executive floor. Only then did I allow my composure to crack, ducking into a bathroom to splash cold water on my face before anyone could see me break. That night, after finally settling the twins to sleep in their corner of my studio apartment, I opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, finalizing the research paper I'd been working on for months. My innovative approach to repairing congenital heart defects in infants was unconventional, but the data was promising. A burden to my career, James had called me. Those words fueled every paragraph I wrote, every citation I checked, every conclusion I drew. At 4:37 in the morning, I hit send, submitting my paper to the Journal of Pediatric Surgery. Then I crawled beside my sleeping babies, allowing myself 3 hours of rest before beginning again. As I sent my first scientific article to the Journal of Pediatric Surgery at 4:37 in the morning, exhausted but resolute, I didn't know that this would be the first step of a journey that would lead me to revolutionize pediatric surgery and eventually to meet James Walker in a position that would completely reverse our roles. When I hit send on my research paper that early morning, I had no idea it would change everything. 3 weeks later, an email arrived that I had to read twice to believe. "Dear Dr. Morgan, we are pleased to inform you that your manuscript on innovative pediatric cardiac repair techniques has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Pediatric Surgery." I stared at my cracked laptop screen, tears blurring my vision as Ethan and Emily played on the worn carpet nearby. The twins were approaching their first birthday, growing stronger each day despite our circumstances. 1 week after the paper was published, another email arrived, an invitation to present my research at the National Pediatric Surgical Conference in Atlanta. My heart raced with excitement before plummeting at the logistics. The conference was in 3 weeks. I had no childcare options for a multi-day trip and certainly no budget for professional travel. After 3 sleepless nights calculating costs and possibilities, I made my decision. We would all go to Atlanta. I emptied my meager savings account, packed 1 suitcase for the 3 of us, and boarded a plane with twin 1-year-olds. The airport was a nightmare of crying babies and judgmental stares. "First time flying with kids?" a flight attendant asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance. "First time doing everything with them," I replied, bouncing Emily while Ethan finally surrendered to sleep in his carrier. Our budget hotel room was miles from the conference center, requiring an hour-long bus ride each morning. On presentation day, I dressed in my only professional outfit, a navy skirt suit purchased secondhand that didn't quite close at the waist, and prepared to face the academic elite. "Please, could you watch them for 20 minutes? I begged the conference receptionist, desperation in my voice. "I'm presenting in Hall B and have no one else." The young woman looked uncertain but nodded. 20 minutes only. I'm not supposed to babysit." I raced to the presentation hall, straightening my jacket and trying to look like someone who belonged on that stage. Halfway through my explanation of the modified suture technique I'd developed, Ethan's unmistakable wail echoed through the auditorium. The receptionist stood apologetically at the back, holding my crying son while Emily squirmed in her other arm. The distinguished audience shifted uncomfortably. My career flashed before my eyes, over before it truly began. Taking a deep breath, I made a split-second decision. "Forgive me," I said into the microphone. "That's my son, As many of you know, medicine doesn't pause for motherhood. I walked to the back, took Ethan in my arms, and returned to the podium. Continuing my presentation with a baby on my hip, I demonstrated the hand movements of my surgical technique while simultaneously soothing my child. When I finished, expecting embarrassed silence, I was met with applause. Several older surgeons nodded in approval, their faces showing not pity, but respect. As the audience dispersed, a distinguished woman approached. "Dr. Morgan, I'm Eleanor Thompson, Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Northwestern." I shifted Ethan to my other hip, trying to look professional while wiping drool from my blouse. "Your technique is remarkable," she continued, "but your perseverance even more so. How old are your twins?" "Just turned one last week," I replied, surprised by her interest in my children rather than just my research. "And you're managing residency with them?" Her eyes were kind but evaluating. "Trying to," I admitted. "It's challenging." She handed me her card. "You have something special, Dr. Morgan. Not just your technique, but your determination. Keep in touch." Returning to Boston, that small victory quickly dissolved. A large framed announcement greeted me in the hospital lobby. Dr. James Walker becomes youngest department head in Mass General history. His smiling face looked down at me, the epitome of success while I struggled to stay afloat. That night, I taped Dr. Thompson's card to my bathroom mirror, a small reminder that someone had seen value in me. 2 weeks later, both twins developed respiratory infections. When I received the call from daycare, I had no choice but to leave before a scheduled procedure. "This is the 3rd time this month," the chief resident fumed, his face flushed with anger. "Either you commit fully or find another program." That evening, as I contemplated the impossible choice between my children and my career, the phone rang. "Charlotte, it's Eleanor Thompson. I'm opening a pediatric surgical research center in Chicago. I want you on my team. And yes, we have childcare in the hospital." While cradling my feverish children that night, considering the offer that would change our lives, I couldn't imagine that 8 years later I would return to Boston not as a failed resident, but as the renowned Dr. Charlotte Thompson, carrying my mentor's surname and a legacy that would make James Walker seem insignificant in comparison. The offer from Dr. Thompson felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Within 2 weeks, I had packed our meager belongings, mostly baby items and medical textbooks, and boarded a train to Chicago with the twins. The uncertainty of starting over was overshadowed by the desperation to escape a system that forced me to choose between my children and my career. When we arrived at the apartment Dr. Thompson had arranged, I stood speechless in the doorway. Sunlight streamed through large windows into a spacious living room with 2 separate bedrooms. "This can't be right," I whispered, as Ethan and Emily toddled excitedly across the hardwood floors, their laughter echoing in the empty space. "Dr. Thompson said it's subsidized housing for medical staff," explained the building manager. "Part of your compensation package." The next morning, I walked into Northwestern Memorial Hospital, clutching the twins' hands, my heart racing with the familiar anxiety of being an outsider. But instead of the cold stares I'd grown accustomed to at Mass General, I was greeted by a modern childcare center on the 1st floor. "Dr. Morgan, we've been expecting you and these little ones," said the director, kneeling to greet Ethan and Emily at eye level. For the first time since their birth, I walked into a hospital without the crushing weight of maternal guilt. Eleanor Thompson was nothing like the surgical chiefs I'd known. In her late 60s, with silver hair cropped short, she moved through the hospital with quiet authority. "Here's where you'll develop your work," she said, showing me a lab space that made my midnight experiments in Boston look primitive. "I've read your paper 3 times. Your technique could change outcomes for thousands of children." I watched her operate that afternoon, mesmerized by her precision. Residents followed her like disciples, hanging on every word of instruction. Our weekly lunches became a ritual I treasured. Unlike my mentors in Boston, who only discussed cases and techniques, Eleanor asked about the twins, about my background, about my dreams beyond survival. Medicine requires sacrifice, she told me, but not the sacrifice of your humanity. 6 months into our new life, I found Eleanor waiting outside my apartment one evening, carrying takeout containers. "Even doctors need care sometimes," she said, noticing my exhausted expression after a challenging surgery. As we ate, the twins showed her their latest accomplishments: Ethan's complex wooden puzzles, Emily's growing vocabulary. I saw something in Eleanor's eyes I hadn't noticed before, a quiet longing. 3 weeks later, she invited me to her office and closed the door. The scans on her desk told the story before she spoke. Pancreatic, stage 4. Her voice was matter-of-fact. 6 months, maybe less. I felt the floor shift beneath me. "Eleanor, there must be—" "I've consulted everyone worth consulting," she interrupted gently. "I've made my peace with it." In the months that followed, our roles gradually reversed. I took on more of her surgical load while she spent increasing time with the twins. She taught Ethan how to play chess and read Emily stories about pioneering women in medicine. "I never had children," she confided one evening as we reviewed patient files in her living room. "Medicine was my life. I don't regret my choices, but I see in you the balance I never achieved." As her condition deteriorated, I found myself stretched between the hospital, caring for Eleanor at home, and the needs of my growing twins. Yet strangely, this period of intense responsibility felt less crushing than my days as a single resident. I was no longer alone. One night, as I adjusted her pain medication, Eleanor took my hand. "Charlotte, I want you to continue my work, the foundation, the research, everything." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "And I'd like you to consider adopting my surname. The Dr. Thompson legacy doesn't need to die with me." The funeral was dignified but simple. Leading surgeons from across the country stood shoulder to shoulder with hospital staff. The twins, not quite 3 years old, held my hands, sensing the gravity of the occasion without fully understanding it. In the attorney's office a week later, I learned the full extent of Eleanor's legacy: a small but well-established foundation, properties, investments, all now in my hands. "She amended her will quite specifically," the lawyer explained. "The foundation is to be renamed the Thompson Foundation for Children's Health, with you as its director." I signed the papers making me officially Charlotte Thompson, while Ethan and Emily drew pictures at the corner of the attorney's desk, oblivious to how our lives were changing once again. As I assumed the Thompson name and directorship of the small foundation that would one day become an international powerhouse, I couldn't imagine that in 7 years I would be applying my surgical technique to save the life of one of Massachusetts General Hospital's biggest donors' daughters, the hospital James now directed and would desperately need my help. In the 5 years that followed Eleanor's passing, I transformed the modest Thompson Foundation into a powerhouse of children's health initiatives. My surgical technique, now known worldwide as the Thompson procedure, had reduced mortality rates in complex pediatric cardiac surgeries by 67%. The small foundation Eleanor had built now employed over 50 people and operated programs on 3 continents. "Dr. Thompson, the team in Nairobi needs your input on this case," my assistant said, placing a tablet before me as I monitored post-operative vitals on a 3-year-old patient. "Tell them to increase the perfusion gradient by 15% and monitor for improved capillary refill," I responded, my confidence born from hundreds of successful surgeries. At our board meeting that afternoon, I announced our 10th pediatric wing construction project, this time in rural Argentina. The Foundation's reach had extended far beyond what Eleanor might have imagined, yet I felt her guiding presence in every decision. My life had transformed beyond recognition. Our Chicago home in Lincoln Park offered the twins their own bedrooms, a dedicated study space, and a small garden, where I occasionally found time to nurture herbs and flowers. The desperate, exhausted resident from Boston seemed like someone I'd read about rather than the person I had been. Ethan and Emily, now 8, were thriving at the Kingsley Academy for gifted children. Ethan's mathematical abilities had already earned him recognition at the state level, while Emily had mastered Mandarin and played the cello with the precision of someone twice her age. "Mom, can you review my science fair presentation tonight?" Ethan asked over dinner, casually using terms like cellular regeneration and mitotic division that would challenge most medical students. "After I help Emily prepare for her Chinese poetry recital," I promised, marveling at how the babies I'd once feared I couldn't support had become extraordinary children. Later that evening, an email arrived that made my heart stop momentarily. "Dear Dr. Thompson, the New England Journal of Medicine would like to dedicate a special issue to the Thompson procedure and its impact on pediatric cardiac surgery outcomes globally." I barely had time to process this honor before a second email appeared, this one from Massachusetts General Hospital's Department of Medical Education, inviting me to deliver their annual Distinguished Lecture Series. My finger hovered over the delete button. Return to Mass General? Walk those corridors again? The thought made my stomach tighten. I hadn't set foot in Boston since our departure 8 years ago. "Mom, why don't you ever take us to Boston?" Emily had asked months earlier. "It's where we were born." I had deflected the question then, but perhaps it was time to face the past, not as the woman who had been discarded, but as the surgeon who had revolutionized her field. Before accepting, I researched the current hospital leadership. The familiar face appeared immediately: James Walker, MD, medical director. His biography detailed his meteoric rise through the ranks of neurosurgery. A Society page photo showed him with Veronica at a charity gala, both looking polished and important. I was about to close the browser when a headline caught my eye: "Walker family leads fundraising for congenital heart research." The article featured James and Veronica with a small dark-haired girl, their daughter Sophia, age 6. My professional curiosity piqued. I read further. The Walkers had become passionate advocates for pediatric cardiac research after their daughter was diagnosed with a complex congenital heart condition. I pulled up the hospital's pediatric cardiology records, which as a consulting physician I had legitimate access to. Sophia Walker's file detailed exactly the type of aortic stenosis that my procedure had been designed to repair, a condition with historically poor outcomes using conventional techniques. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had deemed me a burden to his career now had a daughter whose best hope for a normal life was the procedure I had developed in the aftermath of his abandonment. I typed my response to both emails. I would be honored to accept. Selecting my most elegant pantsuit for the press photo they requested, I thought about how different this return would be from my departure. No longer the desperate resident with nowhere to go, but Dr. Charlotte Thompson, whose name appeared in medical textbooks. When accepting the invitation to return to the hospital where my career almost ended, I didn't know that in a few weeks I would stand face to face with James Walker in a crowded lecture hall, and that he wouldn't immediately recognize me as the pregnant resident he abandoned, but rather as his only hope of saving his daughter's life. Boston. 8 years since I had left, yet the skyline still felt familiar as our private car wound through the city streets. The Four Seasons doorman rushed forward as we pulled up, his white gloves a stark contrast to the gray April afternoon. "Dr. Thompson, welcome to Boston," he said, bowing slightly. "We're honored to have you staying with us." My children stepped out behind me, their eyes wide at the opulence of the hotel lobby. At 8 years old, they carried themselves with a confidence I never possessed at twice their age. "Your suite is ready, Doctor. The presidential, as requested." I nodded, remembering the last time I'd entered this hotel. As a medical student attending a conference I could barely afford, staying at a hostel 40 minutes away. "Mom, can we explore the city after we settle in?" Ethan asked, his analytical mind already planning our itinerary. "Actually, I thought we might take a special tour today," I replied. "I want to show you where we came from." An hour later, our driver stopped outside a weathered 3-story building in Dorchester. Paint peeled from the window frames, and the concrete steps were cracked from decades of harsh winters. "This is where we lived?" Emily asked, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "3rd floor, back apartment," I confirmed. "You both slept in a corner of the living room, in a crib I bought secondhand." I pointed to a small playground across the street, its swings moving gently in the spring breeze. "That park was our Sunday luxury. I'd push you both on those swings, one at a time, while the other waited patiently." "Why didn't we have a bigger place?" Ethan asked, his brilliant mind always seeking logical explanations. "Because medical residents don't make much money," I explained, "and single mothers even less." Emily, perceptive as always, asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why don't we ever talk about our father, Mom?" I took a deep breath, looking at their expectant faces, James's eyes staring back at me. "Because he chose not to be part of our lives when we needed him most," I said simply, knowing this wasn't the full conversation, but a beginning. The next morning, I stood before the mirror in my hotel suite, carefully selecting my armor for the day. The navy Armani suit I'd chosen projected authority, the subtle diamond earrings suggested success. I was no longer the exhausted resident in wrinkled scrubs. I was Dr. Charlotte Thompson, and today I would reclaim the hospital that had once been the site of my humiliation. Walking through the main entrance of Massachusetts General Hospital felt surreal. Nurses, doctors, and administrators turned to stare, some whispering behind their hands. A few of the older staff members looked at me with flickers of confusion, as if trying to place my face in their memories. "Dr. Thompson." The chief of medical education hurried toward me, hand extended. "What an honor to have you here. We have a full house waiting for your lecture." The auditorium was packed, every seat filled with medical professionals eager to learn about the procedure that had revolutionized pediatric cardiac surgery. I took my place at the podium, scanning the audience as the lights dimmed. And there he was, front row, center seat, James Walker, looking older but still handsome, his salt and pepper hair adding to his distinguished appearance. He watched me with professional interest, no recognition in his eyes. Throughout my presentation, I noticed his expression gradually changing, his brow furrowing slightly, as something in my voice or mannerisms triggered a distant memory. By the time I opened the floor for questions, he was leaning forward in his seat, eyes narrowed in concentration. "Dr. Thompson," he said, standing up with microphone in hand, "I have a 6-year-old patient with complex aortic stenosis that hasn't responded to conventional treatments. Given your expertise, would you consider—" Our eyes met fully for the first time, and I saw the exact moment recognition dawned. His voice faltered mid-sentence, color draining from his face as past and present collided. "Consulting on her case?" he finished weakly. "I'd be happy to review any patient files, Dr. Walker," I replied smoothly. "My foundation prioritizes complex pediatric cases." After the lecture, he pushed through the crowd surrounding me, desperation evident in his movements. "Charlotte, is it really you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at my watch. I'm sorry, Dr. Walker. I have another commitment. Your team can schedule a formal consultation to discuss your patient's case. Leaving the hospital with my head held high, feeling stunned gazes following me, I knew that the next move would be James's, and that in a few weeks we would face each other again at the annual fundraising gala, where I would announce a record donation that would permanently place my name in Boston Children's Hospital history, while his world crumbled around him. Back in my suite, I barely had time to remove my heels before my phone rang. James's name flashed across the screen. I'd wondered how long it would take him. Dr. Thompson speaking, I answered coolly, as if I hadn't recognized the number. Charlotte, I need to see you. His voice cracked with desperation. Please, it's about Sophia. I closed my eyes, summoning the professional detachment I'd perfected over the years. I can meet you in the hotel lobby in 30 minutes. When I stepped off the elevator, I spotted him immediately. Gone was the impeccably groomed neurosurgeon who once commanded every room. This James Walker looked disheveled, with deep circles under his eyes and a suit that hung loosely on his frame. Thank you for meeting me, he said, rising from his seat, then stopping awkwardly, unsure whether to extend his hand. Let's be clear, I replied, sitting across from him. I'm here to discuss a patient case, not our history. He nodded, sliding a medical file across the table. Sophia has been seen by specialists across the country. No one will attempt the surgery. The risk is too high. His voice trembled. Except you. Your procedure is her only hope. I examined the scans methodically, professional instincts taking over. The cardiac malformation was indeed severe, precisely the type of case my procedure was designed to address. The Thompson procedure would be indicated here, I confirmed, but the surgery would need to be performed at my center in Chicago with my team. Anything, he whispered. We'll do anything. The elevator doors opened behind us, and I heard familiar voices. My children stepped into the lobby, animated in conversation. Mom? Emily called out. You've been on the phone forever, and we're starving. I watched James's face as my children approached. The blood drained from his features as he took in Ethan's angular jaw, his jaw, and Emily's distinctive way of tilting her head, his gesture. Who's this? Ethan asked, studying James with the analytical gaze he'd inherited from him. Dr. Walker, I said evenly, a colleague from Boston General. Nice to meet you, sir, they said in practiced unison, extending their hands as they'd been taught. James shook their hands mechanically, his eyes darting between their faces, cataloging each familiar feature. You both look remarkable, he managed. Mom, can we eat at that Italian place we saw? Emily asked, already bored with the stranger. My assistant will take you, I said, signaling to Maria across the lobby. I'll join you shortly. After they departed, James slumped back into his chair. They're incredible, Charlotte. So poised, so intelligent. They are, I agreed simply. Do they know about me? He asked, his voice barely audible. They know their biological father chose not to be part of their lives, I replied. That's all they need to know for now. He buried his face in his hands. I've made so many mistakes. My marriage is falling apart. Veronica and I have been living separately for months. He looked up, his eyes bleeding. I never forgot what I did to you, to our children. Not a day passes that I don't regret it. Your personal life doesn't interest me, Dr. Walker, I said, gathering the medical files. I'll review Sophia's case fully tonight and make arrangements if I decide to proceed. The surgery would be scheduled in Chicago. Charlotte, he reached for my hand, but I withdrew it smoothly. What I did to you was unforgivable. Seeing you now, successful, beautiful, seeing our children. Your life choices aren't my concern, I interrupted. What matters is that a little girl needs help that I can provide. That's the only reason we're having this conversation. Standing to leave, I straightened my designer blazer. I'll be in touch about surgical arrangements, and I'll see you at the Boston Children's Hospital Gala next week, where I'll be making an important announcement. As I watched James board the plane back to Boston with a recovering Sophia, I prepared for the grand finale of this 10-year story, the gala where I would not only announce a historic donation to Boston Children's Hospital, but also where the twins would meet, for the first time, the man who abandoned them, in a public confrontation that would forever change the legacy of the Walkers and the Thompsons in Boston. After carefully reviewing Sophia's case, I made my decision. The surgery would be performed, but under my terms. I arranged a video conference with James and the Mass General team to lay out my conditions. I'll perform the surgery, I announced, my voice firm as I addressed the group of physicians on my screen. But it will be done at my center in Chicago with my protocols and my team. James nodded quickly, relief washing over his features. Thank you, Charlotte. We can make any arrangements necessary. Veronica wants to be there, he added hesitantly. She is Sophia's mother, after all. I maintained my professional demeanor. Only one parent can accompany the patient for high-risk procedures. It's the Foundation's policy. A policy I had just created, though he didn't need to know that. The day of the surgery arrived with a crisp Chicago morning. My team was prepped and ready. The best pediatric surgical specialists I had personally trained in the Thompson procedure. James arrived with Sophia, who sat pale but brave in her wheelchair. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat braid, revealing delicate features that reminded me of Veronica. "Are you the famous doctor who's going to fix my heart?" she asked, looking up at me with trust that made my own heart ache. I knelt to her level. "That's right, Sophia. And you're going to be very brave for me, aren't you?" She nodded solemnly. "Daddy says you're the best doctor in the whole world." During my pre-operative examination, I noticed something that made me pause. A small birthmark behind Sophia's ear, identical to the one Ethan had. A genetic marker from James's family. The twins had inherited it too. James hovered anxiously in the corridor as I finished my assessment. He looked nothing like the confident surgeon who had once dismissed me as insufficient. This man was vulnerable, frightened, a father terrified of losing his child. "Charlotte," he said, breaking protocol by using my first name as I exited Sophia's room. "I know you're doing this because of your oath as a doctor, not because of any obligation to me, but I don't know how to thank you." I looked at him directly. "I'm doing this for Sophia. She's an innocent child." "I understand," he whispered. "It's just seeing you here, commanding this entire facility, respected worldwide. It's so far from what you expected," I supplied. "From the burden to your career you thought I would be?" He flinched at his own words being thrown back at him. I was wrong about everything, so terribly wrong. The operating room was my domain, my sanctuary. As I prepared for the 8-hour procedure, I was aware of James watching from the observation gallery. What a reversal. The man who once judged me professionally, now watching me perform a surgery he couldn't do himself to save his own daughter. The procedure was challenging but successful. Each precise movement of my hands represented years of research, determination, and the countless nights I'd worked while my children slept nearby. When I finally closed Sophia's chest, securing the last suture, I knew she would have a normal life expectancy, something that would have been impossible without my innovation. "Surgery successful," I announced to my team. "Excellent work, everyone." Later, in the recovery room, James sat beside Sophia's bed, tears streaming down his face as he held her small hand. When he saw me in the doorway, he stood. "She'll make a complete recovery," I said. "Her prognosis is excellent." We stepped into the hallway, maintaining professional distance. "My marriage is over," he blurted out. "Veronica and I have been separated for months. He hesitated. "I never managed to forget what I did to you, to our children." I regarded him coolly. "Your personal life isn't my concern, Dr. Walker. I'll see you at the Boston Gala next week, where I'll be making my announcement." Watching James board the plane back to Boston with a recovering Sophia, I prepared for the grand finale of this 10-year story, the gala where I would not only announce a historic donation to Boston Children's Hospital, but also where the twins would meet for the first time the man who abandoned them in a public confrontation that would forever change the legacy of the Walkers and the Thompsons in Boston. The night of the Boston Children's Hospital Gala arrived, crisp and clear, stars dotting the sky above the Four Seasons. I adjusted my diamond necklace against my black Valentino gown, appreciating how far I'd come from the woman who once counted pennies for baby formula. "Mom, we're going to be late," Emily called from downstairs, her voice echoing through our suite. I descended the staircase to find my children waiting. Ethan handsome in his custom tuxedo, Emily radiant in sapphire blue. At 10 years old, they carried themselves with a poise that made my heart swell with pride. "You both look absolutely perfect," I said, straightening Ethan's bow tie. "Nervous, Mom?" Emily asked, always attuned to my emotions. "A little," I admitted. "It's a big night for the foundation." What I didn't tell them was that tonight I would announce the largest single donation in Boston Children's Hospital history, $50 million to build the Charlotte Thompson Center for Excellence in Pediatric Surgery, a center that would permanently cement my legacy in the city where I was once discarded. Our limousine glided through Boston streets, passing Massachusetts General Hospital, no longer the place that broke me, but merely another institution that benefited from my surgical innovations. As we entered the ballroom, cameras flashed. The hospital director rushed forward to greet me. "Dr. Thompson, what an honor to have you as our special guest tonight." I smiled graciously, accepting his praise as we moved through the crowd. Whispers followed us, some admiring, others curious about the rumors connecting me to James Walker. "That's her, the surgeon who revolutionized pediatric cardiology." Then I saw him. James stood by the bar, whiskey in hand, conversing with the head of Mass General's board. Veronica was beside him, impeccable in Chanel, though they stood with noticeable distance between them. Our eyes met across the room, and time seemed to freeze. I watched recognition flash in his expression, followed by confusion, and then, most gratifying, absolute shock as his gaze traveled to Ethan and Emily. I saw the mental calculation happening. 10 years, my twins, his unknown children. "Mom, who's that man staring at us?" Emily whispered. "Just a former colleague," I replied softly. "Let's go greet Dr. Bernstein." I deliberately steered my children away, letting James absorb the sight of us, the family he rejected, now clearly thriving without him. During cocktails, I felt his presence circling, always approaching, but never directly engaging. I caught him watching as I chatted with Massachusetts Health Commissioner, as the Secretary of Health warmly embraced me, as the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal discussed my upcoming publication. When dinner was announced, fate revealed its peculiar sense of humor. Mass General's table was positioned directly beside my honored guest table. "Dr. Thompson," I heard his voice for the first time in 10 years as we took our seats. "It's surprising to see you here." I turned slowly, a professional smile fixed on my lips. "Dr. Walker, not really, considering I'm tonight's honoree." His eyes traveled nervously between my face and the faces of Ethan and Emily. "These are my children," I completed, offering no further information. "Ethan, Emily, this is Dr. Walker from Massachusetts General." My children extended their hands politely. "Pleasure to meet you, sir," they said in unison, completely unaware they were meeting their biological father. I watched the color drain from James's face. Beside him, Veronica observed with growing discomfort, clearly recognizing the resemblance between James and my children. "I hear Mass General is considering adopting your protocol," James commented, trying to regain composure. "Your work has been remarkable." "Thank you," I replied simply. "It's gratifying to see so many institutions adopting our techniques. We saved over 8,000 children last year." The lights dimmed as the Boston Children's Hospital director took the stage. During his introduction, I felt James's fixed gaze, no longer the condescending look of the brilliant neurosurgeon to the exhausted resident. This was the look of a man discovering that the woman he judged insignificant had become a force of nature. When I was called to the stage, thunderous applause followed. Standing at the podium, I glimpsed James whispering to Veronica, "She must have changed her name." "She's not married," replied a doctor seated nearby. "She built everything herself." From the stage, with the microphone before me, I addressed the audience of physicians, executives, and philanthropists. 10 years ago, I was a resident physician, pregnant and alone, with just $20 in my bank account. I watched James swallow hard. "When my twins were born, I promised them we would build an extraordinary life, no matter the obstacles. That I would never let anyone make them feel insignificant or insufficient." As I walked back to my table after announcing the $50 million donation, I passed James's table. He looked shell-shocked, as if unable to reconcile the burden from 10 years ago with the billionaire philanthropist on stage. While observing Boston's medical elite processing my connection to James, I realized the true victory wasn't proving him wrong. It was discovering what I was capable of when challenged to be extraordinary.